Tonight we have two presenters, and we're very fortunate to have with us renowned gas leak experts and collaborators Bob Ackley and Nathan Phillips. Nathan will be leading a discussion on the health risks and dangers of our crumbling gas infrastructure system. He's a BU professor in the Department of Earth and Environment and works with the Gas Leak Allies, a coalition of over 20 organizations and individuals working to address gas leaks in our region. Bob Ackley, president of Gas Safety Inc., has 40 years experience on the front lines of gas leak testing and safety. As Bob did the methane air testings for CARCS, he'll be joining CARCS member Kathleen Boyven for our baseline testing presentation. Bob is a wealth of knowledge, so he'll lead the 20-minute Q&A, but we'll be joined with Nathan and Kathleen as needed. We plan to wrap things up by 8:45. Tonight's topic is the pipeline system that delivers gas for fuel to our homes and our businesses, which is leaking large quantities of gas. Our goal tonight is to inform residents about the problems with natural gas and to inspire civic action. Join us. And we're also encouraging you to support our public officials who have listened to our concerns and are leading on this issue. Some of those people are with us tonight. And I'm here to remind residents that local natural gas development projects and federal natural gas projects are inseparable. We cannot be pro-gas and anti-compressor station. When we encourage new natural gas hookups in our towns, we're providing gas companies with the means to justify their next project. That's the customers and the revenue. And finally, I'd like to commend everyone in this room for attending tonight's forum. This isn't a sexy topic, but it's an important one. So please, a round of applause for you, the audience, and please welcome to the stage Senator Paul Feeney and Mark Pacheco.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I want to thank Tracy and the folks of volunteers at CARCS, local officials for being here, Senator Pacheco for coming down, Mayor Haro from the City of Attleboro, Representative Hawkins. So tonight I'm going to be real brief because I know we have a great program and we want to hear from our experts in the field. I just want to first of all welcome everybody. Thank you for what you've been doing. Give you a quick update. We met a year ago here in a similar forum. We went back as legislators. We heard the concerns. As a new state senator last year, I thought it was important that one of my priorities was to address what we were seeing with the compressor stations. Just a quick story on that. Last year I had the opportunity to file some new bills when I took over from Senator Jim Timilty, but we also got the chance to file some amendments in some pretty impressive bills. One, I'm sure you'll be able to talk to Senator Pacheco about, which was a climate adaptation management plan, understanding that despite the fact that we're taking steps now, for years we didn't. Climate change is happening, it's real, and we need to adapt to the different climate change ramifications that we're seeing. And then an energy bill, a sweeping kind of omnibus energy bill that Senator Pacheco has been working on literally his entire career in different iterations. And last year, as it came to the floor of the Senate, I had the ability to offer some amendments. And one story in particular, I'll give a couple. I was able to file an amendment to divest Massachusetts pension funds from fossil fuels. And they told me, Paul, that's kind of a crazy idea. There's no way that would work. Absolutely. And I said, if we're serious about this, and we're serious on a local level, on a state level, on a national level, let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's put our money where our mouth is and send a message in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that we will not invest any more of our funds in fossil fuels. And the second piece to that, I was approached by Senator Pat O'Connor, who many of you met last year, who represents the town of Weymouth. We all know dealing with the compressor station up there at the Naval Air Station. And Senator O'Connor came to me and he said, Paul, we get this amendment. We want to talk about that would restrict the siting of compressor stations in our communities. Now we know, because all of you have been part of this fight for a long time, they'll tell you you have no authority, you're preempted by FERC, it's a federal issue. But for us as state officials, we said, well, we're going to push this and we're going to make sure that we put some restrictive siting language in on compressor stations. And I went to Senator Mark Pacheco. And Senator Pacheco, now, a lot of times when you have these big bills, there's pride of authorship. Senator Pacheco looked at me and he said, not only will I support you in it, it's the right thing to do, you absolutely should do it. We got it passed in the Senate that night. Unfortunately, it didn't make it over the finish line in the final bill. But I just want to commend Senator Pacheco for seeing how important that was, even in his own bill, seeing how important it was for us to put that in there. I do have a couple of bills, which I'll talk to you about later on tonight, casually. I did file a bill this year, Senate Bill 1965, which says simply that if we're gonna have gas pipelines through Massachusetts, the gas has to be used here in Massachusetts. So if you're gonna continue to make the case that we need more natural gas capacity, well then don't tell me that and then ship the gas somewhere else. The second piece, Senate Bill 1966, we heard about the lack of regulatory enforcement on a lot of these pipelines. A bill that I filed would basically create an oversight board that would ensure that we're sending people out to inspect these gas leaks, to make sure that we're inspecting the work that's being done, and a final bill that would put gas pipeline work under the state's prevailing wage law so that we know who is actually working, these contractors working on these pipelines throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So continue on with the work. I'm thrilled to have Senator Pacheco here with us tonight, and I ask you to give him a warm welcome. Senator Pacheco.
It was pointed out to me that I didn't acknowledge Mayor Moreau, so he is here in the house.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Good evening, everybody. Let's go like church. Good evening, everybody. Amen. Let me just begin by just saying how pleased I was coming in tonight and seeing so many people from the area that remembered when I, many years ago, represented Rehoboth in the Senate. I had Rehoboth and Seekonk, and I had told Senator Feeney that he will love representing these communities, and I've got to tell you, I have had the opportunity to work with him now for this last few years, and he has just been an outstanding public official. Anytime he shows up at a meeting, or he takes the floor, or he's involved in an issue, he knows the issue inside and out. And that's what I respect about governmental leaders that I have served with. Those people that actually do their homework, show up, and are not going to back down, but move forward in trying to get accomplished what they're there to do. So I want to thank you, Paul, for your service, and thank you for giving me permission to come into your district tonight, because we have this sort of protocol between our colleagues, and both the representative and the mayor would appreciate this. I had received, Tracy had reached out, and the organization had reached out a couple times for me to come and just give a little update as to what we're doing at the State House with climate legislation in general, and gas, in particular. And I had hesitated about coming in because the location is no longer in my district, and so I called Paul and said, I've been asked to come over, I'll come over, it's close enough, but I just want to make sure it's okay. He says, you better be there. I said, okay, I'm coming. So anyway, let me just say that by way of introduction, for those of you that don't know me, now I am the Dean of the Massachusetts Senate. That means I've been there for a long time. And some people may think it's too long. But I am very proud of my service there. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is that I am the founding chair of the Global Warming and Climate Change Committee in the Massachusetts Senate. Why am I proud of that? I'm proud of it because it was the very first committee on climate change in the United States of America, in any state in the United States. And so that's why I'm proud of it, because we get out there very early, tried to have statewide hearings, tried to get people's opinions on what we needed to do. And back then, I'm talking about back in 2006, 2007, 2008, when we finally passed comprehensive legislation in 2008 that gave us the Global Warming Solutions Act that we have on the books of the Commonwealth today, that gave us the Green Communities Act that provides incentives for clean energy in Massachusetts, that gave us the Green Jobs Bill, and the list goes on in terms of the initiatives that we passed, because at the time, we had a speaker, a Senate president, and a governor that were all on the same page in terms of embracing a clean energy future for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And back then, I had so many people tell me, Pacheco, you're going to ruin our economy. You know, we're going to lose thousands and thousands of jobs. We're not going to be able to do this. It doesn't make any sense. We're not going to lower greenhouse gas emissions. We're just going to lose jobs. That's what I heard over and over and over again. And I didn't have any numbers from Massachusetts to prove anything to anybody that was critical back then. But today, fortunately, I do. As a result of the legislation that we passed, today we have close to 110,000 private sector clean energy jobs in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We created new jobs, and a disproportionate share of them are right here in southeastern Massachusetts. We also lowered greenhouse gas emissions, not had them continue to go up, but brought them down. We have improved our public health as a result of it in air quality statistics, although they are far from perfect. We came a long way in the last decade because of passing good public policy. Now, one of the pieces of public policy that's good public policy is a handout you have tonight that Senator Cream is sponsoring. I believe I'm on that bill too. There's a number of us, I think Paul is on it, there's a number of us that are supporting the bill. But I would ask you to write on the bill paper that you have another number, and that is Senate 2005. Senate 2005. That bill is an act to secure a clean energy future. That ensures that by 2050, we have net zero carbon emissions in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That we will no longer have increasing fossil fuel infrastructure in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that we will run primarily on renewable energy technologies, that we will invest significantly in energy efficiency. While we're the #1 state in the United States of America in terms of energy efficiency, when everybody else is so bad, that's not all that big a deal. We could be doing a lot more in terms of investing in energy efficiency today. So I'd ask you to take a good look at Senate 2005. It is an act to secure a clean energy future. We actually put into statute, what it does is it amends the Global Warming Solutions Act that we passed back in 2008. And it makes sure that this new statute actually tracks from 2020, which is the first benchmark year that we have, and then 2050. But 2030 standards, 2040 standards, they're own goals. They're not in statute, and that's what we seek to do, to make sure that by 2030, we'll be at 50% below the 1990 levels by 2030. By 2040, 75% below the 1990 levels, and by 2050, 100%, which means we essentially will not have any new carbon emissions going into the atmosphere, because we will be a net zero Commonwealth in the United States of America. And so that's what the bill does, and there's a whole range of objectives in the bill that is protected by state statute and the courts. The reason why the Global Warming Solutions Act is so important is because it's law. And we had some people challenge the law. And the law went all the way up to the state Supreme Court, and the Global Warming Solutions Act went out. The Supreme Court in Massachusetts told the administration at the time that you must comply with the statute. You have to bring your greenhouse gas emissions down. It's a public health necessity. You have to do that. And so that's what the law does. Final piece in the Act to Secure a Clean Energy Future is the piece that Paul Affini referenced about the amendment that was done on the floor to protect what we were talking about with Weymouth and here in Rehoboth with the compressor stations. And we had quite a debate. Now, you know, not a lot of it public, but mostly off to the side. People concerned about whether or not it was legal, whether or not it was constitutional. And so what I did during that debate is come up with a compromise. And we basically said, we're going to put this in the statute, and before a bill is actually signed into law, the Attorney General of the Commonwealth has to sign off on its constitutionality. And so we wanted to make sure that the AG would sign off on it. And so instead of having the debate, you know, there was some opinions of members that said, well, this wasn't constitutional. FERC has the, you know, overriding, you know, point of view here, that their point of view is, that's it, whatever they say goes. And we disagreed. We believe that there are sections around air quality and other things that could be legislated. And so we came up with this compromise. We said, well, we're gonna make sure that we restrict where these compressor stations are sited, and we can put those restrictions on as long as it's signed off and approved to be constitutional with the AG. That language that we passed, by the way, unanimously, yes, all the Republicans and all the Democrats unanimously passed a comprehensive climate bill here in Massachusetts in the Senate. Unfortunately, it did not get to the governor's desk because the House did not embrace the bill that we passed. What I'm telling you is an act to secure a clean energy future is substantially similar to the bill that we passed unanimously, with a couple of changes. One of those is, instead of 80% below the 1990 levels by 2050, it says 100. So we actually improved the statute. And who's the co-sponsor of that bill? The minority leader in the Senate, Bruce Tarr, from Gloucester. So we have Senator Feeney, myself, the minority leader, and a couple of the other Republican senators. And I believe in total right now we have over 30 senators that have co-sponsored that bill. So what I would urge your organization to do the same type of thing on that bill that you're doing with the bill you're talking about tonight, because your issue is part of that bill. The language, the best language I think that we're going to get out of, the legislature on this is already in the bill that we passed last year. And so we're saying, let's try to get this on the floor of the Senate again this year. Let's get it passed. And there are some different faces in the House of Representatives this year. And there are some different attitudes in the House of Representatives. The Speaker now has given 1 or 2 speeches on climate change over the last year and a half. So I see that as a very, very positive sign from the House. Climate is now part of the issue in the national debate, finally, for the very, very first time. And it should be. Because as one of the candidates says, this is the first generation that is starting to feel the effects of climate change, but most importantly, it is the last generation that can do anything about it. So it's up to each and every one of us to demand that the urgent and critical problem of climate change that I believe is the #1 issue in our country that we should all be focused on. Because this issue of climate transcends dozens of other issues. It is a national security issue. All of the major advisors in national security have said so publicly and want something done about it. It is a public health issue. One of the most important public health issues that we can have. It is an economic development issue. It is the issue that when we solve this problem, we can create millions of new jobs and formulate an economy that will just be outstanding for the 21st century. So it impacts national security, public health, the economy. It is a very, very important issue. In dealing with this issue, in my opinion, the issue of gas and gas compressor stations, gas is no longer a bridge fuel, in my opinion. It was a bridge fuel 20 years ago. We only have about 10 or 11 years left to straighten this issue out with climate. So we can't, we've just got to move forward and embrace all the technologies that are already there. We don't need to invent any new technologies, although they're being invented every day of the week. The only thing we need right now, and everybody here knows this to be true, is political will. We just have to have the votes to get done what should be done, what needs to be done for this generation and for future generations of America and the world. So I thank you.
I don't know. Oh, yeah. I brought my.
Yeah. Yeah. Jim wanted to say a few words about Weymouth.
Well, Weymouth and the two senators that are with us, I believe I co-sponsored every one of Senator Feeney's bills that he mentioned, and I'm on the TUE committee, which is Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy, and I was on the panel with Senator Pacheco when both of the gas company hearings, and what they say safety first, which is not quite true. But the other thing that I've been active in besides in the State House is joining forces with the Weymouth compressor station people. We realized when the governor approved the air quality permit about a month ago that something very bad was happening. And a group of people, you people in Carks are so dedicated. We went up there and stood at their rally, and I've since joined forces with them. I go to their meetings as well. I've worked with them in the State House. They have protests going on in the governor's office. And I'm trying to be part of all of those, because together, we need all of us to work on this. We're fighting a very powerful industry, so kudos to all of you for what you do, and count me in as part of the action. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, and I want to just start by thanking Tracy for pulling this all together, and Carks for all of the work that you've done through thick and thin. I know the project seems to maybe have abated now, but these things can come back, so your vigilance is really important. So thank you for doing that, and the senators and Representative Hawkins and the mayor for your leadership on clean energy. It's really inspiring. So I'm going to give you a bit of a fire hose of information here, but it's a fast primer on gas leaks. And I like this thing that this colleague of mine in Lund, Sweden, she put together, Professor Kim Nicholas, a little primer on climate change, 5 points. And I figured that same framework works pretty well for gas leaks. Gas leaks 101, it's leaking and it's warming. It's our old pipes, we're sure about that. It's a bad situation and we can fix it. So are you controlling? So next slide, please. And so this all started for me actually about 2 years prior to this publication in Boston, when I met this gentleman on the streets of Newton, where I live, and he was investigating gas leaks. I'm a tree physiologist, and I found out from Bob Ackley that gas leaks kill trees. That's what hooked me into this. And then I realized that I had this accidental toolkit, because I had been studying greenhouse gases and how water moves through trees and how carbon dioxide and other gases are moving through forests. So I had the toolkit to help to address this question. And from that chance meeting with Bob in 2009 or 10, I can't remember, we then got some funding and mapped all of the gas leaks in Boston, and we mapped 3,356 individual gas leaks in Boston. And what we realized, 3,356 gas leaks in Boston. If I were to guess, I'd say there's still around 3,000 gas leaks in Boston today, maybe even more. So this was something that we realized the only people who knew about this were the people in the industry, and they knew about it for decades. You and I, we didn't know about it. We'd hear anecdotes by people who would be saying, oh yeah, I always smell a gas leak here or there, but until a map is shown where everyone can see everything, no one really knows the scope of it. So from that to the next slide, oh, and just these numbers here, the background ambient level of methane in our atmosphere is a little bit under 2.0 parts per million. Even that level is the new normal, because 150 years ago, it was like less than 1 part per million. It's grown globally faster than CO2 has relative to its pre-industrial baseline. But even with that little under 2 part per million background, these are the values, some of the values that we saw, 14, 22 parts per million in the air that people would be walking through, on streets and sidewalks. Next slide. And so this was the paper that we published, Bob Ackley, myself, and others, that showed those 3,356 leaks. Next slide. And we then found that this is not confined to Boston or even greater Boston. This is across the eastern seaboard, whether we found over 6,000 leaks in the Washington, D.C. area. I say we. He was the person that mapped all of these leaks. Next slide. To Manhattan, Durham, North Carolina, Cincinnati. So we found that, and some towns and cities do better than others, and it's related to how diligent they've been fixing their leaks. And the age of their infrastructure. Next slide. And it's our old pipes. We're sure of it. Here's where I live in Newton. We just live right up here somewhere. And there's a lot going on here, but you can see some of these things you might not be able to see. 1924, that's a pipe there. Here's another 1924. 1923, 24-inch cast iron, 22 PSA, 1926. So these are cast iron pipes that some of them go back in certain parts of the city to before 1900. It's old pipeline infrastructure. Let's see, how do I don't know what I'm doing here. I think I'm getting it. Oh well. Had it backwards. Okay, next slide. And this is happening globally. We see this. I pulled this data just yesterday from NOAA's website, and you can see the increase since the mid-'80s. This is methane, CH4, going up, and it's even accelerating in the past few years, coinciding with the kind of boom of the fracking. So this is global CH4, methane, which is the largest constituent of natural gas. Next slide, please. And what we know from the most...
Can you bring that slide back, please?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
That value, that numerical value on the left hand,
Yes.
what is the unit of measure? Is that parts per billion or parts per million?
Sorry, I'm moving too fast. You're right. This is parts per billion. So this would be
So
one...
the value is different than the previous slide. It's 1,000 times different.
Yeah.
1,000 times
1,000 times
different.
different.
1,000
Yeah,
times.
so this would be like 1.9 parts per million or 1,900 parts per billion. Thank you. Next slide. And so we know that the latest study by NASA, and this has been confirmed by others, show that of all of the sources of methane into our global atmosphere, the predominant source is fossil fuels, oil and gas. And so this study showed that these days, for about 25 teragrams of methane going into the atmosphere globally, about 17 of that 25 is due to fossil fuels. Okay, so that's the big thing. There's other sources, but that's a big one. So coming back here to Massachusetts, the study that we did that found the 3,356 leaks, questions immediately came like, well, what does it all amount to? How much is coming out of all those leaks? And greater Boston and across the Commonwealth, how much is it all amounting to? So a follow-up study that we did used sensors on the top of buildings. So we're using the integrating power of the atmosphere itself to tell us how much is coming out. And we estimated about 2.7% of the gas that's delivered into the Commonwealth is leaked into the atmosphere. 2.7% doesn't sound like maybe a lot of a leaks rate, but because methane is like a greenhouse gas on steroids, it's dozens of times more powerful than CO2. It has an outsized effect on climate warming and climate pollution, so that 2.7% leak rate amounts to about 10% of the Commonwealth's entire greenhouse gas emissions inventory from all sectors. Okay, so it ends up being a big deal. And I wanted to just show that our numbers from the study that we performed that got that 2.7 leak rate are not tremendously different from industry's own figures. So the gas utilities have to report to the federal government every year how much they have lost and can't account for gas. And within that black box of what's called lost and unaccounted for gas, there's a part of it that's called natural gas pipeline and distribution use, which they say is defined as known volumes of natural gas that were the result of leaks, damage, accidents, migration, and or blowdowns. And you can see here that these values here they've increased over time, and these values are in million cubic feet of natural gas, but that ends up being, for the most recent year, 2017, it's about 1.9% of the total amount of gas delivered. So we got 2.7% in our study. Industry's own numbers are of the same order of magnitude. That 1.9% that they're reporting would be about 7% of Massachusetts greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Now, some of that, we're not sure all of that is leaked, so we have to find out a little bit more about that, but the order of magnitude of the estimates is about the same. Next slide. Bringing this down to more locally, the utilities, as a result of a 2014 law that was passed in Massachusetts, required the utilities to be more transparent about the leaks. And so now every year they have to report where the leaks are. And so Attleboro, as of December 31st of last year, is reporting 68 leaks. Seekonk is reporting 23 leaks. I think Rehoboth had 2 leaks, and I'm not showing that here. You have to take these a little bit with a grain of salt. We found out that the utility reported leaks are sometimes not where they say they are, and sometimes we find leaks where we actually find a lot of leaks where they have not found leaks themselves. But that's the state of what they're reporting. Next slide. And I want to now take this to another level, because most of the work that I've been involved in up until recently has been with all of these pipelines that are running under our streets and sidewalks that have these problems. But then, as we saw on September 13th of last year, you can have these large gas system failures like what happened in Merrimack Valley with the collapse there. You all know about what happened there. And so next slide. But we're just starting to realize that these events, there's been a lot of rolling of the dice, and there's been things that had the potential to have serious, large-scale consequences that we got lucky. We really got fortunate. This article was published just February of this year by Ali Jarmani that showed that Columbia Gas was fined only after the Merrimack Valley incident for also these overpressurization events. Hit the slide forward button. So I just want to say that to show you that, in fact, in Taunton, there was a pressure surge for 27 minutes after an equipment failure, and these are at least above 15% of maximum operating pressure, and they don't have to report however much it went beyond that. They just have to say it went over like 15%. So we don't even know some of the things that have happened, but there were 5 such overpressurization incidents with Columbia Gas in the last few years. So these are very, very concerning types of things that connect what's happening at high pressure systems to the low pressure systems that are running to our streets and to our homes, basically. Next slide. And here we are. Here's the 3 towns of Attleboro, Seekonk, and Rehoboth right in here. And this is all Columbia Gas territory. There's a little bit here on the neighboring communities that are Liberty utilities. So this is the service provider that, same as Merrimack Valley, down here as well, having some concerning overpressurization incidents. Next slide. Just to really solidify that these system level problems are happening. We're seeing them. So you might have heard about Aquidneck Island in January, right? Rhode Island, 7,100 customers without gas in the middle of winter. Very, very concerning situation. And one single valve. Does anyone know where that valve failed? It was Weymouth where the valve failed. And so no one really would have guessed that, and it's still unconfirmed. This is what National Grid is saying. It must have been a valve in Weymouth that was owned by Enbridge that failed, that led to that collapse. And so we have this happening very recently. Next slide, please. And I'm sorry, I have to rub it in a little bit here. This is Weymouth, and this is the location at which that valve failed. And this, to me, gives you an indication of the seriousness with which Enbridge is taking safety. This is the lock on the site, that the current site of their metering and regulating station that will be right adjacent and connected with the compressor station that is being proposed to be put in Weymouth. It was Spectra, as you know, and it's been bought out by Enbridge. This is still here as of just a few weeks ago. So there really needs to be a lot more seriousness paid to the safety issues. Next slide. And just, I want to kind of close out here talking about some of the health issues that are involved. So Bob and I went out to Southern California in late 2015. It was the biggest gas leak. It was like the Deepwater Horizon oil leak, but for gas. A storage facility failed and gas was coming out from a failure like 9,000 feet below the surface, so they couldn't stop it. It was just spewing out. And the gas pouring into this neighborhood of Porter Ranch, kind of from the mountains up here into Porter Ranch. And people were complaining of all of these health problems, nosebleeds, headaches, etc. Next slide. And when we drove our sniffer in Bob's van through the neighborhoods of Porter Ranch, these are what the types of data that we were seeing of methane, up and over 60 parts per million methane. And what we realized, it's like being around a campfire. And if the wind is blowing at you, you're getting blasted with it, and then the next minute the wind can shift and you don't really detect anything. So it was very intermittent as it was blowing down off and into the neighborhoods. But we were getting these values of 60 parts per million in the streets and sidewalks of Porter Ranch. And you could really smell that sulfur mercaptan smell. Next slide. And what the Office of Emergency Health Hazard Assessments from California were concluding to the residents there was that the symptoms reported by many Porter Ranch residents can be attributed to odorants in the natural gas. Those mercaptans, those sulfur-containing materials that make it smell like rotten eggs, was what they said was giving all of the health problems to the people. Now, they didn't even comment on the other things in the gas that maybe might come up from our other speakers. But that's a health concern. Next slide. And I want to bring it back here. What did we learn from there? Well, we have mapped this is in Somerville and Charlestown, Rutherford Square, Sullivan Square, sorry. We're getting 90 parts per million sometimes when we go in that roundabout, okay? And so it's not as big a volume of leak as what was out in LA and Porter Ranch, but when you're closer to a leak and you're driving right over it, it can reach the same concentration levels in the air. So if the people are getting sick in Porter Ranch from that leak, should we not be concerned about the health impacts of leaking gas into our air outside as well as inside our homes? Next slide. And so this is where I walk my kid to school, or used to, from our house. We go over the Mass Pike here on this bridge, the leak right here, 37% gas in this area. We would smell it every day that we walked to school. And so I wonder about the health impacts as well. Next slide. And so just to finish, that we can fix this problem. A third study that we did showed that 7% of the leaks account for 50% of the lost gas. We call those super emitters. And what this indicates is that there's a cost-effective way to address the leaks, to triage the system. If we can find and fix the biggest leaks, we can stem that problem while we transition to cleaner, safer, more reliable energy sources based on renewables and a lot of the work that has been done from our legislators. So this was a very important piece of work that Bob and Margaret Hendrick, a PhD student at Boston University, did and published. Next slide. And so one thing that you can do is, as was brought up before, is support this bill as well as SB 2005. because both of those bills are about really saying yes to clean energy and giving the utilities a way to transition off of gas. Now that we know that 7% of the gas leaks account for 50% of the lost gas, we can patch but not replace those pipes. There's a huge cost difference if we replace those pipes rather than patch them, stem that leaking gas, and invest our money in cleaner sources of heating, which this bill allows us to do. Next slide. And I just want to thank all of the different partners that have stepped up and helped us to do the research. So, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go over the baseline testing that we did in 2018 that we at CARCS did, but I'd like to start with a brief overview. So CARCS formed in response to Spectra Energy's Access Northeast project, and the project was would increase the throughput of fracked gas through the Algonquin transmission pipeline by 35%, and as part of that project, a compressor station would be sited in Rehoboth. And Spectra is now owned by Enbridge. The financial mechanism for funding the project was initially going to be a pipeline tax, so they were going to surcharge everyone, electric ratepayers, on their electric bill to fund the project. Our state Supreme Court determined that that funding mechanism was in violation of energy restructuring rules and did not allow it. So because of funding issues, they withdrew the project from FERC in June of 2017. So a lot of people will ask us, like, why are you guys still working on this? Why are you concerned about it? This project's dead, it's over with. But it really isn't. There's still a lot of activity going on behind the scenes. They're still trying to get that funding mechanism. And in fact, in May of 2018, New Hampshire's state Supreme Court reversed their Public Utility Commission's decision. Their PUC had determined that they would not allow a pipeline tax. The state Supreme Court reversed that decision, paving the road for a pipeline tax in New Hampshire. On the heels of that, Eversource, which was one of Spectra Energy's partners for this project, started advertising that they wanted to reactivate this project. Then, of course, in September of last year, we had the Merrimack Valley disaster. On the heels of that, they did end up writing off their share of the project, but there's still a lot of lobbyists up at the State House. And if you go to the Enbridge site, all the information about Access Northeast is still up on the website. And this quote comes directly from their website. So essentially what they're saying is when the states achieve alignment in the form of uniform energy policy supporting natural gas infrastructure for electric reliability, the project's partners remain able and committed to bringing Access Northeast to New England consumers. So that's why we at CARCS are still doing everything that we can. We're using, in case this project is reactivated, what we're doing right now is focusing on baseline testing so that if the worst case scenario happened and they reactivated the project and then we did end up with a compressor station and did have issues, that we would have baseline data showing that we didn't have these issues prior to the infrastructure going into place. Now this is a map showing the proposed site. It is in North Rehoboth on the Attleboro-Seekonk line. The blue lines show the Algonquin transmission pipeline. And the reason this site is preferable to them is they have access to the intersection of two major pipelines, the G5 and the G1. And then in Attleboro, on the border, we've got the Ponset-Hewitt fields, athletic fields where the Attleboro children play sports very close by. And we also have two of Attleboro schools within fairly close proximity to that site. And if the project did go through, it would be a 10,320 horsepower compressor. So compressor stations are known emitters. The reason they would need the compressor station is to pressurize the gas to keep it moving through the pipeline. And because of that, these units run 24/7, 365 days a year. They're constantly running. So there's sources of noise pollution, and it's both high-frequency noise and low-frequency noise. So if you lived further out, you probably wouldn't notice the high-frequency component because that does dissipate with distance. But there's a low-frequency component to this that's more of like a rumbling sound that can also be felt as a vibration. And that can bother people as far as 5 miles away. And we know that from studies that have been done, and also from our friends in Burrillville that have come here and said that people that far away can hear the compressor station. Also, their source of air pollution, it would be a gas fire compressor. So there would be the pollutants from burning the methane to run the compressor. So it would be nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, hazardous air pollutants. Some of the common pollutants from natural gas or fracked gas are the BTEX chemicals, so it's benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene. A lot of those are known to cause cancer. And then there would be the release pollutants. So these systems, every once in a while, they have to take the compressor offline, either for standard maintenance or for emergency situations. And when they do that, they do what's called a blowdown, where they vent all the gas in the system into the atmosphere. And in addition to being extremely loud, they're releasing a huge amount of fracked gas into the atmosphere, which would contain methane, VOCs, and hazardous air pollutants. And then there can be non-combustible contaminants such as chromium, radon, lead, and mercury. So we're concerned about the health issues. Fracking really took off in around 2010, so it takes a time to accumulate that data and determine the full health impacts of this newer technology. This study summarizes a health survey that was done in Pennsylvania. And what they did is they looked at people living within a few hundred feet of fracked gas facilities, including compressor stations, and those living 5 miles away. And then they broke the people into two groups, those living within 1,500 feet of a facility and those living further out. And they surveyed them for health symptoms that are commonly associated with exposure to fracked gas. And this chart, what shows is the percent of people reporting symptoms. And then the black bars represent the people living closest to the facilities, and the white bars represent those people living further away. And then the red arrows indicate the instances in which the people living closer to the facilities had a significantly higher incidence of reporting that symptom. So those symptoms that were significantly worse if you lived close to a facility were throat irritation, sinus problems, nasal irritation, eye burning, severe headaches, shortness of breath, loss of sense of smell, persistent cough, frequent nosebleeds. Nosebleeds near compressor stations are pretty common, especially for young children. And then also painful joints was another symptom. So there are a lot of studies coming out now that document the health issues associated with fracked gas infrastructure. We're also concerned about our aging infrastructure. The Algonquin transmission pipeline, the bulk of it was installed in the 50s and 60s. So a lot of that's probably bare steel, which is susceptible to corrosion. Corrosion is a time-dependent process, so the longer the pipe sits in the ground and it's exposed to the elements, the more likely it is to have issues with corrosion. And that's on the transmission side. And then on the distribution side, there's still quite a bit of iron pipe in place in use, and that's very susceptible to shifting of the ground from, especially in New England where we have the freeze-thaw cycles. And on the distribution side, although iron pipe represents 2% of all gas mains, it's actually responsible for 11% of the worst leaks. Locally, we do know that they had to replace sections of the Algonquin pipeline in 2016. And these actually were reported to the town. Usually these companies, especially on the transmission side, are sort of self-reporting. They don't necessarily have to report it to the town. But in this case, the locations bordered wetlands, so they did report it to the town because they had to disrupt the wetlands in the process of replacing the pipe. So it was reported to Rehoboth Conservation Commission. So this was in 2016. You can see the photo on the upper left shows the old corroded pipe. And then the photo on the bottom shows the old corroded pipe in the forefront and then the new epoxy-coated pipe in the background. So what we've been doing at CARCS is we've been focusing on baseline testing. We want to have, data on our air quality, data on our water quality, and also, sound. And we focused on air testing and well water testing in 2018 with our limited budget. So we did methane testing, we did the CRDS mobile unit, which Bob Ackley is going to talk about in a moment. We also did 24-hour SUMA canister testing in the areas near the compressor station. And we did well water testing. We tested for methane, PCBs, and volatile organic compounds, including those BTEX chemicals, which are common in fracked gas, the benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. So right now I'm going to let Bob take over to talk about the mobile methane testing.
Very great, very great. Hey, just want to thank the senators and reps and these guys coming. It's really important. And everybody here should be really lucky to have Tracy and Doug and Kathy and the rest of SARCS, because I'm telling you, people around here don't know some of the things that I've seen out in Pennsylvania, where we did a paper on 5 compressor stations on the Marcellus Shale and Dimmock area. And what was really wonderful was the equipment that I've gotten with Nathan and the work I've done out there looking at methane. And Kathleen's slide a few minutes ago showing all the components that are in those emissions are very, very important to, I think, everybody here. And they were very important to people in Pennsylvania, but they gave up. They're really in a bad spot. I went around with a gentleman named Frank Finnan around many compressor stations monitoring them. And what we would do is, I had the methane analyzer that I'll explain to you in a minute that's just so fantastic, and he had particulate matter meter. And what we did was we used the methane trace to find the particulate matter. And I learned this from Frank, that the particulate matter is very, very fine. And that's very, very dangerous. I'm not a doctor, but what you're getting from these compressor stations is the particulate matter and the methane that can be very hazardous. And you saw all the benzene, toluene, xylene, and everything else that's in it. So you're lucky, again, to have these people to let you know. So I'm Bob. And I met Nathan testing trees. I started out testing, trying to protect trees in the Commonwealth because I knew that gas was killing trees. That's how we found gas leaks, looking at vegetation. And a tree guy moved into my neighborhood and rode me for 10 years to start telling people that gas was killing trees. And we knew that this was a major greenhouse gas issue back in the 90s. With all these gas leaks coming out of the systems. And, but I had 4 kids and I stayed with the gas company. I worked doing gas leak compliance for all the gas companies in the Northeast, probably the Eastern Seaboard. So I couldn't really get away from that. But this equipment, I met Nathan while I was testing trees in Newton with his son, and he had one of these pieces of equipment on his roof monitoring the methane in the atmosphere 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with Picaro. And what Eric Crossan did from Picaro, he came up and saw all these gas leaks that I showed him with our industry equipment and said, well, wow, I can take a GPS unit and stick it on the analyzer, and we can run the analyzer, which runs off 110 AC. We can put an inverter in the car, put a GPS unit in, put a timestamp on. We can even put an anemometer on. We can ride around, we can map entire cities. And that's what you saw, what we did. And opened up first with Boston and then to Washington, D.C. So here, that's me, in case you didn't know. I think I lost that. It went to the other one. Wait a minute, there we go. So this has a screen here, and it's got all this equipment. Is my van. I don't know what's, let's go to the next slide and we can show it. I explained to you, we just basically drive down the street, and we have an air sample that comes in, and a laser beam is shot through it and gives us the methane concentrations in parts per billion, and puts that's every second, puts a timestamp and GPS stamp with it. So what we can do is we can go right around the site, and this is what I did in Pennsylvania, at many places in upstate New York. If the compressor station was here, I try to go right around the entire area, because the wind can change and you want to see what the emissions are, and we try to find that plume. The one you saw up on Porter Ranch, Nathan was talking about up in the Susanna Mountains. One day we didn't find the plume went away. Well, I drove 40 miles around up to Santa Rosa, I think it was, and found the plume was coming over the Susanna Mountains, coming on the entire neighborhood north of the Susanna Mountains. So when the gas is emitting from these places and the particulate matter, if it's not coming towards you, it's going towards somebody else, because it's constant. So we did Carpenter Street here. This equipment is amazing. You can find the minutest change in the methane, in the ambient methane. And when I started this, I have data that shows the ambient methane at around 1.87 parts per million. We're now, very rarely do I see below 1.95. And that is when I have a southeast wind off of the ocean, is the clean air. When I have wind from the southwest, sometimes my baseline is up over 2.1 parts per million, and that's because it's coming from the Marcellus Shale. So this is really great information for the whole community to have. We have a gas leak a couple gas leaks here on Carpenter, and there's another one over here. I think it's Meadow Sweet Lane. And we have a beautiful clean area all the way around, and that's what we put in the bank. I don't have data to show what I saw at compressor stations in Pennsylvania up here. It would take a lot of time, but what we see is huge plumes coming off, and there are no gas distribution pipes in the area. It's only transmission lines and gathering lines. What do we have next? Okay, so here's the Carpenter Street leak, and then here is the other leak, and then here's your pipeline. So these are not on the transmission lines. These are on the distribution lines, and this is our instrument trace going right around. And what we do is we multiply any deviation from the baseline is multiplied by 200, so we can see it. Because if it goes from 195 parts per million to 2.1 parts per million, you wouldn't be able to see that trace. So it's really remarkable equipment that should be used by the gas industry, but it documents too many leaks.
Well, that's a good thing.
The study in Boston, that we had 3,600 leaks. We used a threshold of 2.5 parts per million, when actually further testing that I've done showed that almost any deviation from baseline was a leak. So I think that the actual leak number was probably double that. And same with Washington, D.C. We used the same threshold, so we were very conservative. So there are a lot more leaks out there than what the industry is showing. Do we have another one? Yeah, here's Carpenter Street. Distribution line leak, very easy to see in the clean area. Will stay right here, and this was 4.76 ppm. So anybody, I have, this machine's a couple of $100,000 a year lease. I can smell the gas before the machine goes off. If you smell gas, there's a leak. Don't let anybody fool you. It's generally a gas leak. What's so wonderful is we can document all this. Do we have one more? Okay, here's the one on Meadow Sweet Trail. And I'm not even sure, this might even be a leak on a plastic line. Anywhere there's a gas line, there's the potential to leak. The plastic they put in the 70s has already been deemed substandard, and they're replacing it because it was bad pipe. The steel that we have thousands and thousands of miles of bare steel that it's really hazardous, and cast iron that's really dangerous. But the coated steel that's running around a majority of the Columbia Gas distribution system in this area is really substandard. It's old, from the 50s, coated steel. Anything below, I think it was 1970, is considered substandard. We have what they call the applied extrude coat. It's a coating that's put right on, and they're all cathodically protected with a little bit of electricity going through. So really, if you have some of these older pipes, that they're all going to go. They're all on their way out. I can go on for hours about this. I think do we have one more slide? Okay. Here again, we're showing Meadow Sweet Trail. And we can make these spikes look as big as we want. I can just put it in the file to multiply by 500. and make things larger. What's important is that you detected an emission, and then we can pinpoint that emission with proper equipment. A lot of times I'll get a little blip, very, very small. Somebody said, well, that's a small leak. I said, no, that could be a very large leak up next to a house. And we're just that far away from the emission. So if I go right over the gas leak and there's a drill hole in the street where the gas company had already been there as a vent hole, I'll get a high read. So any type of emission that's a deviation from the baseline could be an extremely hazardous leak. We can't look at these and say, oh, that's a big one and that's a small one. That's 2.54. That leak, without testing it, could have the same or greater emissions than the leak that had a 4.5 ppm. So when anyone looks at this data, realize that this is a detection tool. In this mode, it's not a quantification tool. That's very important. Do we have one more? Again, this is giving us the areas we went on the trace, and we're showing nice clean areas, and the pipeline goes right through here. I've monitored transmission lines for many companies, including National Grid and Columbia Gas and other companies, and I have never found a leak on a transmission line. When there's a leak on a transmission line, it usually ends up as a disaster. You know, what happened in San Bruno, or you see these, if you go onto my Twitter account, I post all the explosions around the country, and you'll see transmission lines let go. I don't know, every 4 or 5 days, every couple of weeks, something lets go somewhere, and you have a big fireball. Luckily, we haven't had that fireball here on a transmission line. We had the fireball in Merrimack Valley, which was a real nightmare. I was involved with the Lexington overpressurization, where we lost one house. I worked there for 6 months, 7 days a week after that incident. You saw what happened in Merrimack Valley. I think it was actually heroic that they got that back on before winter set in, and it was a miracle that Aquid Neck, the weather changed. If you remember, it was 0 out the day before, and I think, or right around that, and the weather changed. We could have had a human disaster in either place. We just missed it. I mean, all those houses would have frozen right up solid. Do we have one more? We do. Okay, same kind of thing. We went right down by the high school. And here's our transmission lines here, and we're not showing, you know, a nice clean test here. And that's what we want to see. We don't want to see a lot of emissions. Do we have another? Okay. Oh, and this goes to the SUMA canisters. So I'm happy to answer any questions after about any of the testing, and I really want to thank these guys here for putting together a good presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so this slide shows the area where we tested with the SUMA canisters. So what we did is we picked 4 locations around the proposed compressor station site, north, south, east, and west of the site. And we did have the canisters certified. These canisters are very expensive, so they do get reused for testing. So we had the certification done. The certification just verifies that the canister was clean and did not contain any contamination prior to us taking our samples. And then we put the canisters in place in the areas around the site, collected it for 24 hours, and then sent it to the lab, and had the air samples tested for VOCs. We really didn't find too much. We just found kind of like very low levels of acetone, carbon tetrachloride, and ethanol. But the level, excuse me, the levels were considered normal baseline level, background levels. And excuse me. And then for the well water testing, we tested wells around the compressor station site and also around the transmission lines. And what we had them tested for PCBs, VOCs, and methane. And we found that 15% of the wells had detectable methane levels, but the levels were pretty low. The highest level was 24 micrograms per liter, which is equivalent to 0.024 milligrams per liter. But 10 milligrams per liter or less is considered safe. So even though we found detectable methane levels, they were considered at pretty low levels. And the issue with methane in the water is usually actually an explosion issue, like if there was high enough levels for the methane to accumulate, and then you had an ignition source. So for our future plans, we'd like to focus on, go back and do some additional well water testing. We'd like to retest the wells where we found the detectable methane levels, just to make sure they're not increasing at all. And there's some other tests we can do to determine the source of the methane, whether it's natural or if it's from gas infrastructure. And then we'd like to redo the SUMA canister testing and have a control away from the compressor station site. And then we'd also like to test for particulate matter. And there's some monitors that are hooked up to Wi-Fi where you can get data like continuously, so we could get a nice, good baseline data, get those daily and seasonal fluctuations. And then we'd like to do sound testing. We would do the high and low frequency noise. So that concludes our presentation. We're ready for Nathan and Bob are available for questions if anyone has.
So we're going to collect your questions, assuming you have some, and we've allotted time to for you to pick some brains here, some valuable brains. So we go around and collect. Anybody have questions?
Hey Bob, did you test this room before the meeting?
What was that?
Did you test the room before the meeting?
I did not test the room, and I am involved with that, testing indoor air, by the way. This says, what does a bridge fuel mean? My interpretation is, the bridge fuel was to get to the renewables. We were going to use gas to get over to our renewables, electric and green energy. I'm a member of well, let's say I'm a graduate of the Northeast Gas Association, and I'm in their program. And I get the Oil and Pipeline Journal, Oil and Gas Journal still. So they just referred to natural gas not as a bridge fuel, but as a foundation fuel now. So that is something that needs to change, I think, they are now referring to natural gas as a foundation fuel as opposed to the bridge fuel. Have you heard this? Have you seen this?
What's the foundation fuel?
This is what was in the Pipeline Oil and Gas Journal, and one of the op-eds from one of the top dogs was that it was now a foundation fuel.
Which means it's going to be used for everything?
Well, let's try to make it a non-foundation fuel, maybe a dying fuel. Has the graphic testing results on the different states been presented to FERC? I'm assuming you're talking about the distribution lines that we did in Washington, D.C., or New York City, or we did Cincinnati, Ohio, Boston, Raleigh, Durham. I would guess that they saw them, but I don't know if FERC is down to the distribution level as much as they are in the at the upper energy generating levels. So I don't know about FERC, but I think that Washington, D.C. really perked up when they saw our map with Rob Jackson and Nathan showing methane emissions around the White House and around Capitol Hill. And it was really a great honor for me to do that job and get to see all of the District of Columbia, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Every street was quite an experience. So I think that really pushed all the pipeline replacement programs that you're seeing, and that's something that actually we don't support. We support what Nathan refers to as triage and transition. Fix the pipes. Get the 7% super emitters, and then be aware. Smell gas, call 911. Don't allow leaks in your neighborhood. Nobody should be smelling gas. If you smell gas, call 911. The gas company comes out and says it's a non-hazardous leak. Say, well, what if a new leak occurs tomorrow? that's not this leak. Nobody should smell gas, in my opinion. Anybody that says it's okay to smell gas maybe hasn't seen an explosion site where a house blew up. And Mr. Tarr up in Gloucester knows all about that with Wayne Sargent up on Eastern Ave. They had 13 calls or something like that to Eastern Ave in Gloucester, and then Mr. Sargent's house blew up with him in it. So that was a 6-inch cast iron main, and the gas company was called many times to that location. So this is the thing that can happen with gas, is that you can, your house can blow up and bad things can happen. So be vigilant. Don't allow gas leaks to be around your property, your community, your school. We had a leak on Worcester Street in the south end of Boston. Went on for 6 months outside of school, and 2 weeks ago, two huge trees came down in the windstorm that was on a couple of weeks ago on a Monday, an hour before school came out, and it crushed a car. So any gas leak that's at a tree, that's where I'm at. I started protecting trees. We know that gas leaks kill trees. Every tree that has a gas leak at it should be checked by an arborist, and they should be repaired. Let me see if I have another one here. Okay, we have the Bridgefield. Do we have another one?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Isn't there a number to call to report gas leaks other than 911? Well, why would you call another number? I mean, the mantra from the gas company, and someone that I was a contractor to for almost 40 years, is when you call the gas company because you smell gas, they say, well, get outside, don't smoke, don't start your car, don't start anything up, don't do anything, and we'll be there within an hour. Okay? They try to get there in a half an hour. They get fined if they're an hour. Now, I live in Southborough, Mass. I called the fire department once to my house, and they were there within a minute and a half. And I live kind of far away from the fire station. Anybody that smells gas should call 911 and get the fire guys out there. They have the equipment to make sure that you're safe. And always think of the worst situation, when it's 0 out, 0 degrees. Do you want to evacuate your house and wait outside and wait for the gas company to come with an instrument to tell you that actually it's okay inside your house, or would you rather wait 2 or 3 minutes for your local fire department to come down? And they should all have the training, and they all have what's called a 4-in-1 instrument to check for natural gas to make sure that your house is safe, or your business, or wherever you're at. Worst case scenario is to have a gas leak in the middle of the winter outside of a nursing home or a hospital, and somebody says evacuate when you don't have to. Think of the ramifications of that, of evacuating a bunch of elderly people out into the cold when there's a gas leak out there that, maybe somebody else knew about, the gas company. They let all these leaks go for years, 20, 30 years. You go back to the same gas leaks, and it's really quite disturbing. Okay.
Let me just add one thing to that. Yesterday in Weymouth on Water Street, there was a gas leak that they had to evacuate a large building there, 25 Water Street. The whole street had to be evacuated due to a strike on a gas main from a construction crew. Apparently the markout, the DigSafe markout, was marked incorrectly. But National Grid was out there, and they were searching for the shutoff valve, digging in the ground, trying to find where the shutoff valve is, and that should not be happening. The shutoff valves should be known. Sometimes they're paved over here in the Commonwealth, and this is a very dangerous situation. It's a real safety lapse to have those shutoff valves not even be known where they are. So, here's a question. What do you do when you find the spikes or the leaks with the information? Do you tell someone who will fix it? And so when we do our surveys, we're getting leaks left and right, so we would just be stopped if we stopped at every single leak. We detect them with this vehicle, but to pinpoint where it's actually coming out of the ground, you have to get out and do a survey of the leak. So we're not doing that when we're doing the drive around, but when we have, on occasion, found a leak, we get out and check it out, and if we find that it's a dangerous or potentially dangerous leak, we absolutely call that in to 911 or National Grid up in that service territory, or whatever the gas company is, because there's no way we can't feel like we could let something like that go if we have some knowledge that there's a potentially unsafe situation. So we definitely call those in. Yeah. Did someone over here have a question that you just,
Yes.
yeah.
I spoke to who I consider a mole of the fossil fuel industry a couple of years ago. He was at a lecture, and when I realized what Spectra was doing up on our eastern seaboard, that they wanted, what they've done, the Algonquin line, I turned to this fellow and I said, I hope, and I'm asking you if this is possible, or if I'm just, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a gas expert, but these pipelines that they're putting in, and they're going to want to make new ones, they're not going to want to repair, they're going to want to replace. Can those pipelines be dual usable? Can, when renewables come through, are we going to be able to use these useless pipelines, 20 years from now when this is going to be obsolete? And this is what I said, you got to make it so it's that way. Is that feasible, or?
These are stranded assets that are going to be worthless.
Yes.
And these are investments people are sinking money into that cannot be here, in 15, 20, 30 years. So I think that's something we all have to realize. There is a pathway, the right-of-way for which, at least on the lower distribution size pipelines, we can, and this is in the future bill, those pipeline right-of-ways can be fitted with clean heat, water that are district heat systems that are distributing out heat that's clean through insulated water pipes. And there is a pathway for doing that. And if this sounds crazy to people, it's not. It's been done in Europe, in Paris they're doing this. It's not actually even that high tech. And so this is definitely doable. And right now the costs of just going, if we continue to do what we're doing now, we're paying $1.7 to $1.9 million per mile of pipeline replacement. There's about 21,000 miles of pipes in the Commonwealth, and about a third of those are leak prone and need to be replaced, or are said to be needing to be replaced. So it's about 7,000 miles. And that price tag is about $9.5 billion to rebuild the system that we can't have. So I think we need to think about the movement towards electrification and clean energy for the heating sector, the building heating sector.
I'd like to add to that, that goes with the triage and transition, at $1.5 to $3 million, almost some areas in urban areas are $5 million a mile. And if we have 4 leaks per mile on this leak-prone pipe, and we allocate $5,000 a leak, that's $20,000 to fix the leaks on the pipe, as opposed to $4 to $5 million. And what I advocate for is increased monitoring of the pipe. I was a leak survey guy. Increase the leak survey. Instead of doing it every year, do it 2 or 3 times a year and give the people the education. We have wonderful equipment now. We can do a survey in 1/10 of the time. But the gas companies have resisted this equipment. If we go out there and look at these systems and monitor these and stop putting all this money into the pipeline replacement, we would save a lot of money. But that train has been kind of left the station, and it's very difficult to stop it in the Gas Safety Enhancement Plan. And these guys know what I'm talking about, and a lot of people know. This Gas Safety Enhancement Plan, $9 billion. We could fix all the leaks in the state. I think the number was $70 million. We've been working on this. We could fix every leak in the state for $70 million bucks. Of course, we'd have a bunch more leaks come in every year where we'd spend maybe another 50 or 70 million fixing those. But are we going to spend 9.2 billion? That's the question that people have to ask themselves. How are you going to work with that? And I think that's a really important point. Everyone's gonna ask themselves how we're gonna go.
Okay, I ask you a question. You piqued my interest when you talked about, you know, in the event that there is a failure, right? We have an issue, say, right here in Rehoboth, if, you know, we know there's a fire or something happens. You mentioned mock-out, which is, I think, you know, in my experience, frequently they're off target on their mock-outs, especially with some of the contractors they have coming in and doing that work. And then gate boxes and shut-off valves. It predates my service in the Senate, but I can remember legislation surrounding, you know, those gate boxes and shut-off valves, making sure that there's an accurate, you know, representation of where they are and that they're accessible. Did anything ever happen with that? And do public safety officials have access to that? So if there's a fire here in Rehoboth, then, you know, Chief Baresi, his call department respond to that. Do they have access to those shut-off valves before the gas company gets there? Can they shut off the gas?
It's unbelievable what's going on. They've buried the shut-off valves everywhere. And I'm working with some people in Worcester, all the school departments. You know, we have some legislation about leaks around schools. And we had an annual inspection of all public buildings, like this library, if it had gas, which should be checked. And one of the things we were supposed to check for was that the valve box was not only accessible, but operable. So what you do is you look for the curb valve, and everyone should do this. If anyone has gas, do you know where your curb valve is? Probably nobody. Maybe one or two people say, oh yeah, I see that little box out there. Well, when you open the box up, you'll see that it's most likely filled with dirt. So if you have a fire at your house, and this is what happens, the fire happens, and if the house is served by gas, every fire the gas company is dispatched to the house, every fire. And if they have gas or not, I mean, they may not know if there's gas, but they go. If the house is on fire, they're tasked to shut the gas off. Because if the house collapses, the gas will feed the fire. You'll have appliances will break off, even if it's not a gas fire. So more times than not, what happens is they can't find the shut-off valve. So they end up calling an emergency crew out with a backhoe. They dig down to the service and they take a big pair of tweezers and they pinch the service off. And then they have to dig, you know, then they have to redo the whole thing after, you know, cut it off. So a lot of times you'll see fires go on for 3 or 4 hours longer than they have to because it was a gas-fed fire from the broken off appliances and the gas is flowing freely into the building and the gas companies are trying to find the shut-off valve. So everybody that has gas should be looking at, you know, where their shut-off valve is and make sure that it's operable. Every school, every church, every public building, critical to have, you know, any type of structure, you should know where that is. I've been also talking about the old service lines. There's 100,000 gas lines that we know of in the state that are bare steel, that are in for replacement, that could be over 100 years old coming to your house. And I'm advocating for everyone to be notified whether you have a bare steel service coming to your house. You should be notified. Now we have another 100,000 services, they don't know what they are. And I'm assuming that those are also bare steel. So we have 200,000 service lines in Massachusetts out of 1.3 million that are hazardous pipes. They're classified as due for replacement, and nobody knows if you have them. The gas company knows who has them. They know who has 100,000, and there's another 100,000 people out there that they're not quite sure even where the gas line is. So shouldn't you, as a homeowner, if you had gas coming to your house, say, I look at my electric service and the electrician said the wire's all frayed and everything. You should replace that down wire because it could arc, get a spark, and burn your house down. Home inspector tells you that. The home inspector doesn't look at, say, the gas line and say, hey, do you know how old that gas line is? Is that a 1878 bare steel service that's coming in that's ready to let go at any time? I mean, the oil guy came to my house. I have oil. He said, geez, you got a copper line there. That needs a liner on it going from your oil tank to your boiler. That's out of code. Who says anything about the gas line that's coming to your house that's 100 years old that's bare steel? And I can't tell you how many times I found leaks at the foundation wall on bare steel services. That's what we did. We went to houses and found leaks at the foundation and called the gas company and say, hey, you gotta get a crew out here and fix this right away, and we go, make sure that the house was safe, the gas wasn't getting in. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these go on all the time. This is what we call a non-explosion event, but we missed it. We've actually calculated it's around 27 times a day in Massachusetts there's an emergency hazardous gas leak every day, on average. Yep.
How do we, the homeowner that has gas, doesn't know what type of line they have, how do they get this determined?
I would call the gas company and ask them. You might be the first person in a lot of times people will call up when they're going to dig safe and they'll mark the gas line out. I advocate that you call the gas company tomorrow and say, I want to know where my gas line is. Do I have a shut-off valve? Is it operable? Is it accessible and operable? And what is the pipeline material that comes to my house? Is it plastic, bare steel, coated steel, copper? What is it? This I think, 1,300 cast iron service lines in Massachusetts.
So I will need to ask a specific person, or the person who...
Well, yeah, I mean, it'd be kind of interesting to find out and get back to me what they said.
Okay.
Because this is something that we're working on right now that is like, we're going to issue a report coming up pretty soon that talks about this and says, hey, do you have a bare steel service line coming to your house? How old is it? It's older than my grandmother. My grandmother was born in 1899. She's been dead 20 years, and the gas line's still coming into a house. I mean, good God. I mean, how can people actually think about that and comprehend that there's a gas line coming to your house that could be 125 years old? I don't know how people could put up with that.
So if it's the wrong material, say bare steel, are they gonna come out and fix it, or do you have to pay for that?
I would ask them to come out and inspect it, and they do that for free. They will come out and say, hey, is this thing okay? And then have somebody come out and say, yeah, it's okay. And they'll look at it and say, geez, maybe it's not okay. I mean, we would be tasked with corrosion inspections to look at those pipes and rate it as good, fair, or poor. So a poor service would be put in for replacement as soon as possible. Yeah.
I'm just curious, what is the ideal service that you want to carry gas into your home?
Well, for me, if it was my house, I would like a plastic-coated steel service line that was cathodically protected with electricity, as opposed to the plastic they're putting in now, because the plastic is more susceptible to third-party damage, which is a shovel or a backhoe or something, and the steel has a little bit more resiliency, but now they're using plastic. And what they'll do, if they have a 100-year-old service coming to a house, and they can push a piece of smaller diameter plastic through the old pipe, and it will carry the gas load. It has to have enough capacity to heat, to service your house. They'll do what's called the plastic insert. If they can't get a plastic insert in, they'll do what's called the direct burial and put a new piece of plastic to your house. They won't put a steel service in anymore.
So in other words, unless you want to pay for this, which probably is very exorbitant, they're not going to do that. They're not going to do the safest.
They may or may not, I don't know. If you have an old bare steel service and they know it and you've asked them about it, they may act on it. But it is. It is, but I think people should have the option. They should, one, be notified that they have the pipe, and they should be able to replace it at their own cost if they want to. Just like I replaced my oil line or my electric service. I think they should pay for it, and they will eventually. They'll say, well, you're on replacement, you're on schedule, let's see, today is 2019. You're on schedule 2028, so you only got 9 years left on the 30-year plan to get to your service. Well, that's kind of what's happening. You might get lucky and it'll be on schedule next year. Or maybe you have a new service and you don't know. That's what I think is what's needed here, is transparency, where everybody knows what they have.
What you're saying new is just the plastic. It's not something that's durable.
To them, that's durable. The plastic, that's what they're using now.
Back to subjectiveness.
Well, yeah.
All right, we've run a little over, but thank you so much for coming. And thank you, Bob. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Senators.
Thank you, we're all lucky to have these guys again.